Hello and welcome to The Briefing, a weekly conversation with leaders and experts on the issues affecting our democracy today. I'm Michael Waldman, President and CEO of the Brennan Center for Justice. It can be really easy to get mesmerized, for better or for worse, by politics that takes place at the national level. You can watch what's happening in Washington, D.C., and wince at the division, at the polarization, and at the sheer dysfunction. But we all know that so much of what happens in government, for good or for ill, takes place in the states. That's certainly true for the Brennan Center on the issues we work on, but it's true for so many things. And so much of what our citizenry thinks about government depends on what happens with their interactions with state governments and local governments in their own lives. Often they don't even know they're dealing with government. This is true all over the place, and it's really true in particular ways in a key region in our country, in the South. More than I think a lot of people realize, the South of the United States is a fast-growing region. It is an extraordinarily dynamic region. It is a growing region in its diversity, with immigrants and many other ways in which it is moving beyond what we might think of as the South of the past. The population growth in the southern states overwhelmingly has come from those communities of color. Yet at the same time, the governmental institutions in the South lag behind. There's more gerrymandering, more extreme voter suppression laws, harsher criminal justice systems and policies, and much more. There's a mismatch between the population as it is and as it is growing to be, and the way the South is evolving. This is both a challenge and a real opportunity. If we can get things right in a region like that, it will have a huge impact and model progress for the rest of the country. That's why we at the Brennan Center are very excited to launch a new initiative that takes place in Nashville and will have an impact all across the South. It's a partnership with Fisk University, a renowned historically black college and university, HBCU, and its John Lewis Center. And this partnership is called the Partnership for Southern Impact. It's already begun work on policies, working with legislators, working with activists and scholars and journalists in this dynamic and critical region. And we're really excited to be part of it. And we're going to be joined by the leaders of this effort. First, by Dr. Agenia Walker-Clark. She is the president of Fisk University in Nashville. And then we'll have a conversation with Dr. Sekou Franklin. He is the executive director of Fisk's John Lewis Center. He is the president of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, and by Dr. Kareem Crayton of the Brennan Center. He is our vice president for our Washington, D.C. office, a renowned expert on voting rights and representation, and our colleague who has taken the lead in forging this partnership with our friends and colleagues at Fisk. Welcome, first of all, Dr. Clark. Fisk University is such an extraordinary institution with such a storied history that has played such a critical role in so much of our country's history. You've been president for 2 years. What is it that we should know about Fisk?
Oh, my gosh. So that's always a difficult question because in my 2 years, I feel like every day I learned something new that I didn't know the day before. For instance, Fisk University just got its full accreditation reaffirmed by SAC-COC, the accrediting body that we've worked with for years. And I look back at our history only to learn that Fisk University was the first HBCU to ever get accreditation. So our history, now being at 160 years old, there's so many. I feel like sort of like every decade was just sort of like another hallmark moment that has contributed to the sustainability of the institution. Fisk University, like HBCUs, is an institution that has never been what I would call over-resourced. But the beauty of the institution is that it continues to determine how to sustain itself into the future. And these hallmark moments all seem to sort of contribute to it. So the very first hallmark moment I like to share is that Fisk University, of course, the first students were freed slaves.
Just a year after the end of the Civil War.
Can you believe that? Can you believe it? And of course, institution doesn't have any financial resources. But the treasurer of the school, a gentleman by the name of George White, would hear these freed slaves, i.e. students, singing on the campus grounds and thought, now that's a beautiful sound and that's a beautiful voice. From that, the Fisk Jubilee Singers were born and created. He led them on a U.S. tour, but then realized a European tour is where the money could really be made that would provide resources to the school. And that European tour in the 1870s resulted in Fisk University having the first funds to buy the land that we still occupy today.
Wow.
And to build the first permanent structure on the campus, which is Jubilee Hall. And that building, we're still using it today, I think was built in 1873. And today it's a women's residence hall. So there are just so many exciting things. But the Fisk Jubilee Singers, I always like to share this with everyone because it always surprises them when I say it. The first is that Fisk University was the first institution of higher education in the city of Nashville. So we were the first.
Vanderbilt.
We were the first one. We were the first one. And the second is thanks to the Fisk Jubilee Singers and the European tour they were on, Queen Victoria had the opportunity to hear them perform. And her comment was, these are such beautiful voices. They must come from a city of music. Nashville, Tennessee is the music city.
Right. Wow. She did not say we're not amused as she has on other occasions.
No. She was spellbound.
And when you think about what it meant to create a college, it had been, of course, just a few years before, illegal to teach enslaved people to read. There's an audacity to saying, now let's start a college. And I think some of the folks watching might not fully understand the significance of, as you said, HBCUs. Those are historically black colleges and universities, and the role they played during Jim Crow, but continue to play right now. And maybe, one of the consequences of what the Supreme Court has done, and others in really taking a hammer to efforts to ensure diversity in higher education, in some ways, is to make sure that these institutions still play the role that they've had to play before.
Absolutely. And continue to play the role, and the demand for that continues to grow. And that's the beauty, that despite everything that's going on from a macro level, at the micro level, our ability to serve the more than 1,000 students that we have today doesn't meet the demand for the number of students who apply every year and who want to come to Fisk.
And who are those students? Where do they come from? And where they
from? Right now, the enrollment represents about 35 to 37 states in the country. We have students that are there from 3 countries, maybe 4. And they're there because what you've alluded to. The first is that the history of the school, especially as we start approaching the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, it just became a place that elevated the notion of social justice, which is how we ended up having a leader like John Lewis, who went on to become a congressman, educated at the school, and created that's why we have the John Lewis Center for Social Justice.
He was a student at Fisk.
Yes.
Studied divinity, am I right?
Yeah, studied divinity. He was a student at Fisk. He did some divinity work at the American Baptist College, which is another HBCU there in the Nashville area. But that was what he came there to do, and ended up being a part of a movement.
It's a movement. It is I and my colleagues who've been working with you and the folks at Fisk are so struck by what a special place it is, what a sense of itself and its mission, and how congruent that is with the work we all aim to do to improve people's lives. Yeah. You mentioned the singers.
Yes.
They're still around. They are Grammy award-winning. They didn't have that, I think, in 1866.
No, they did not.
Still
They're
traveling
still
around,
traveling
still singing.
and performing, and everyone who has heard them sing and perform, they still perform the Negro spirituals that the original group sang in the 1870s. So it's a very unique sound. This is not gospel music.
Mm-hmm.
These are spirituals, and the sound and the way they carry the story and the words of the lyrics, how the singers themselves every year are trained by directors who are trained in the art of that sound. Is very unique.
And it's a very distinctly American.
Very
this
distinctly.
This was the wellspring of blues, jazz,
country,
rock and roll, hip hop.
Yeah.
Flow out of that.
Yeah.
Music, which itself came from African music, Scottish music, and all the other things that poured into
it. And I think that's why when people have an opportunity to hear them perform live, several have said that it was a spiritual moment for them. One friend said it tickles the nerves in my soul. But I think it's because spiritual is more than about the sound. It is about the lyrics. And to watch these singers communicate with each other as they're carrying this music forward. It is absolutely a fabulous experience.
John Lewis, of course, was a student, was the courageous leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, as so many people know, led the march on Selma, paid with his own blood and his own physical courage, and eventually was a leader in Congress, working with the Brennan Center and many others to try to protect voting rights, to try to advance democracy, and all these other things that are currently at risk. And we, in doing our work, know that so much of the work we do takes place well outside of Washington, D.C., well outside of the Northeast, especially in the South. And we looked for a partner to do this work even more deeply in this vibrant, growing, and complex region. And we're really excited that we've launched this with you, the Partnership for Southern Impact, with the John Lewis Center. How do you see this from your perspective as something for Fisk?
Everything that I look at Fisk, I look at it from the lens of the student. And what is the student experience? What were their expectations when they came to Fisk? And now that they're going to be graduating and moving on into our world, what do they take with them? So I frequently can be found having lunch in the cafeteria or just, walking across the campus. And the thing that makes Fisk so special, again, we're still in that original footprint. So I share with people all the time several things. We walk on hallowed grounds, and the spirits of the leaders like the John Lewis, it seeps into the soles of our shoes every day, whether I'm walking across the campus to go eat in the cafeteria or just standing on the lawn talking to students. But you will tell that because we are so small and because the school is built on a foundation of students having clubs of interest and taking courses of interest, we may be liberal arts, but I will also say it's not in such a very traditional context. So all of our students that come to Fisk get the opportunity to be exposed to its legacy, to hear the stories of those who have come before them. But now they know that their task with building the stories that go forward. History has been set. We are now partnering with the Brennan Center, and now the work that comes out of the John Lewis Center for Social Justice will be the legacy that'll be looked back on for the future. Could not have come at a better time, because now is the time, and you will see and feel and experience that level of enthusiasm with the students, whether you're coming on campus and walking across the Grove or going into the cafeteria for lunch.
And we are thrilled to have so many of the students working with us as interns and others, because we're all in these issues right now, empowered by the past, but very much of this moment and fighting for the future. And it is great to be doing it in partnership with you and your colleagues.
Excited about it. We couldn't be more excited about it.
Same here.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
We'll have a conversation with Dr. Sekou Franklin. He is the executive director of Fisk's John Lewis Center, and with Kareem Crayton, who is the vice president for our Washington, D.C. office at the Brennan Center. As we launch this partnership, what does success for democracy look like in the South going forward?
Success can mean many things. Some of it is political education. Some of it is what I would call crowdsourcing various advocacy groups, policymakers and lawmakers into a cohesive kind of unit, so to speak, particularly in the South. Ideally, we would like to offer a roadmap for legislation, policy, various forms of policy intervention, whether that be election guides, whether that entails ways in which we can bring attorneys in to assist people who are in dire need. So, success can look many different ways in the South. And I think, with the partnership, it's interesting because it sounds odd, but there is a psychological uplift that it offers. Because in the South, especially in the last decade or so, things have been tough at the state legislative level, but not just at the state legislative level, but the courts, the administrative agencies, all of them are effectively, if I want to be honest with you, leveraged against everyday and working people. So a lot of folks are beaten, quite honestly, beaten down, not beaten, but beaten down. And so the partnership, in addition to policy interventions and working on state legislation, success also means crowdsourcing activities, but also it offers us a psychological uplift and hope for the future of what can be done.
That's really important. That's really important. And at a time when we also know that often state governments make it a lot harder for people at the local level to do what they think needs to be done.
Yes.
States all over the country, but certainly all over the South.
Yes. One of the big things that's happened all over the country, and there's a lot of great research on this, is that state governments have accelerated the use of state preemption. Mm-hmm. So local governments that want to adopt legislation, particularly around rights, particularly around workers, state governments, especially in the South, and some great research on this, have passed laws preempting local governments from doing this. And in places like Tennessee, in places like Florida, Alabama, in fact, I've done some research on this, state governments have passed preemption laws overturning police reforms, overturning reforms around workers' rights. We've seen state preemption nullifying affordable housing interventions. Mm-hmm. And those state preemption policies preempting local governments from doing those kinds of interventions have had life-altering consequences. There's some research out there that have suggested that state preemption of particularly healthcare issues and affordable housing issues have shortened lifespans. So this partnership with the Brennan Center offers another pathway, a countervailing force against those kinds of mechanisms that are undermining democracy at the state level, but also at the local level. And I also want to emphasize that the partnership is important, not just in terms of state legislatures, but also in terms of offering interventions for the administrative agencies mm-hmm. that are also, in many respects, creating great damage to everyday people and working people in the South.
And this is where some of the legal background, some of the factual work we all do, and other things can be brought to bear. People get mesmerized by Washington, D.C., but of course, it's the preemption issues are not just Washington and states, but as we've discussed, state capitals and cities. And really, we're learning more about how much of American government really is not in the green room at Fox News or on Capitol Hill, but where people are actually living. Kareem, you are the leader of this work for the Brennan Center. From your perspective, what would success look like for this partnership and more broadly for democracy in the South?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that Sekou mentioned just now that I think is really the theme that we heard throughout our planning process was about hope, that much of what we see as a challenge in the South is connected to people feeling like either there's nothing in government that helps them and therefore they tap out and don't participate, or the people who do participate finding brick walls. That is either that they find a bureaucracy that's not responsive to what they want. They sometimes get thrown out of legislatures when they try to voice their opinions. And so in all of those ways, I think success has to involve having more avenues for the public to have more influence over the way government works. And we think that that's going to, I think in the long range, work to the benefit of having more competitive elections, having more responsive government, and ideally, right, better outcomes for the public. I think that the one thing that you see throughout in the South are all these studies that talk about how bad policies or unrepresentative policies do have real life impact on people. Like lifespans of people are challenged, whether you're talking about women getting access to basic medical care in the South, to people being able to get educated to prepare themselves for the workforce. All these things are things that could be improved by Southern legislatures and the policies that follow from it. But unfortunately, we're stuck where we're building more prisons than we are creating educational opportunities for people. So that's what I think this deep work is going to happen to have impact for in the long term. Most people having more opportunities and hopefully we think longer lifespans to enjoy a full and exciting life.
And it's noteworthy as we do this that it focuses on this region. I want to talk a little bit about the South, how people see the South, and actually the reality of it today. As you've written and we've described, it's the fastest growing part of the country. The growth has come overwhelmingly among communities of color. It's economically dynamic. After the census of 2030, it will have more electoral votes and more congressional seats than before. And all of that is coupled, as you said, with worse gerrymandering, worse voter suppression, more harsh criminal justice laws, and other things of that nature. What is it that is special about the South right now? And in what way will the South be setting the tone for the rest of the country?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that animates this whole partnership is that, we have observed that Washington, D.C. is stuck, and it is stuck largely because we basically, I think collectively as a country, write off the South to, one party. And anytime you do that, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, for a long time, it was the Democratic Party that ruled the South. Right. You block the opportunity for change. And so I think one of the big observations was really learning how to observe that just below that surface of a pure red, or before that a pure blue, cover, is a pretty rich and competitive community of people who think differently about a lot of different things. I mean, I'm from Alabama, where, there may be, a lot of differences between people who like Alabama, the University of Alabama, and Auburn.
That's heavy duty stuff.
Heavy duty stuff. And
which team do you?
I am an SEC booster, so I'm ecumenical about that.
Oh, wow.
But
that is a dodge.
Well, yeah. But the main point is that there are all these differences that exist in the South, and they don't often get reflected in the way policies get made. And I think that's really the work that we have to do, not to say we're fomenting about more fights, but it's to say, we don't always have to do things one way. Maybe we should think about what it looks like when different communities have something to say about it, and maybe to figure out how compromise is a part of the solution too.
The South is, of course, politically polarized. The whole country is politically polarized, but in a lot of ways, the South is even more politically polarized. We see this in all the jurisprudence and the litigation around the Voting Rights Act, and why it's so important to have those protections precisely because of people's voting patterns. Do you think the South is evolving, or is it, as Faulkner said, the past is not over, it's not even past?
Well, it has a potential to evolve. We still have major problems around racial polarization, political polarization. It has, in many respects, at least since I've been in the South, gotten worse in terms of electoral polarization. We are often stuck in our enclaves, and so if you are in one community, let's say, for example, a rural community in Tennessee, you're likely to see one set of news stories. You're likely to get one set of podcasts, So you have what the old term they used to call the segregated campaigns that are targeting people. So polarization,
even more than before, because you can narrowly target people.
I think more so than since I've been in Tennessee. And a lot of that then overlaps with is your county or is your area, what's the racial balance in that area, what's the resource infrastructure for campaigns that from one party to the other. So there's a lot of polarization, and it's gotten in many respects worse. But at the same time, there is a story and there's a long history of ways to overcome that polarization. There's great efforts at multiracial coalition building in the South. We see a lot of cross-sector organizing among workers. We've seen, this is in the South right now, we see that despite the fact that there is, in many respects, extreme forms of electoral polarization and extreme forms of racial polarization, there actually is more cohesion around a lot of issues that have the potential to lead to positive outcomes.
Are these values issues or economic issues that cut across racial lines?
A lot of them are economic issues. I mean, in all parts of the South, there's a concern about affordable housing. In all parts of the South, we've seen in the last couple of decades, we've seen dislocated workers because of plant closures. In most parts of the South, we've seen concerns about health care. Yes, there's a story that, for example, that maybe Medicaid expansion doesn't happen because of kind of the old story. Whites are kind of more committed to so-called racism. That's kind of the story that's come out. Right. But in places like Tennessee and places like Arkansas, the reason, although we haven't expanded Medicaid, the effort to expand Medicaid was a biracial, multiracial, rural-urban coalition that pushed that. So we have a lot of stories. And what I like to say to folks about the South is there is that story of polarization. Emphatically, that is a story. There is an equally relevant story of multiracial coalition building, of ways in which we can build movement-based infrastructures. And that's a story that we need to invest in, and that's a story that will carry us to the future.
And that has always been the way we've made progress in the country. It's in its own, interestingly, its own sort of lost history is the coalition building and multiracial coalition building.
It's a very much lost history because the story of the South has been told as a singular story, as a singular narrative.
We were talking earlier about Lyndon Johnson,
yes,
and where he came from, which was not the deep South, but was Texas, which was really, he would occasionally be a Westerner, but it was pretty Southern too, and how he grew up in the Hill Country, which was desperately poor. And in fact, when the New Deal was passed, it needed to be brought into those communities through the simple expedient of creating electric power. And there it was much more, the racial diversity was around Mexican Americans, but it actually, again, created the economic progress and economic policies created opportunities for social advancement that had not been there before. And again, it's I think, got to be part of the answer going forward. Yeah. We had, and I wasn't able to be there, the inaugural event, which was with legislators from across the South. And it's so striking because this is true in legislatures everywhere. A lot of the legislators just don't have a lot of staff. What is it that and I'm the only person in this whole podcast who is not a PhD political scientist, so I'm sort of at a disadvantage here. But what is it that those folks who are doing this work, I assume a lot of these jobs are not full-time legislative jobs. What is it that our work can help the people who are doing that kind of work as they try to make things better?
Right. So we did have a session that had state legislators from around the South. We also included experts and advocates to really help get a full picture of what the legislative process looks like and what it can be. What we learned in that conversation, which we've been hearing in a lot of different spaces, was that, legislators are always looking for a lot of expertise in thinking through the next policy that, might be on the horizon on an area like AI or criminal justice reform. They also are looking for, because particularly when you're in a supermajority, if you're not part of it, the process moves quickly and you may not get things like the opportunity to bring in a witness. So having access to people who are experts who can talk through an analysis of an existing bill, both its positives and its negatives, is useful. But I think the other piece of it, more than anything, is to help people both in the relationship between legislators and the citizens, but also legislators and experts understand that just because the issue in front of you might be, horrible. We talked about a lot of groups that are in the business of putting out legislation or proposals that are bad for representative government and, for the progress of
a lot of those proposals come from out of state.
And that's exactly right.
It's a nationalization of this stuff that is noteworthy.
And to be able to call that out, to say, look, this has been tried in other places and it's failed, and to help the people understand that there is work to do, that you can, as a private citizen, show up and, bring this point to bear, both to the legislators who are thinking about it, but the public as a whole. That's work that can actually, I think, create change in this conversation about whether or not, the legislature is going to be representative in the long range. And I think we can be a piece of that, formula.
As we've said, we're viewing this not only as work in this region, but also as part of understanding the importance of states as a general matter. Again, we can get mesmerized by what goes on in Washington, D.C., but certainly on the things we work on, so much of the policy always has taken place at the state level, where there's new thinking needed, new organizing needed, new coalitions needed, and where there's a hunger all over the country. And so we view this not only as valuable and important in its own right, but also as a model for the kinds of things we want to try to do around the country. A last question. You lead the John Lewis Center.
Yes.
And he, of course, was a moral leader, a leader of activism, but also a political leader. It's very inspiring to even be part of carrying forward any of his legacy. And he actually worked with the Brennan Center when he was in Congress on voting rights legislation. We worked with him, I should say, and in support of him. What does it mean to you to have John Lewis as the name on the door?
Well, for me, it's everything. In part because I also come out of a movement of kind of nonviolence, and John Lewis is one of the principal voices in that particular space. But it means everything in part because of the diversity of John Lewis. He himself as an organizer, he himself as a lawmaker, he himself as a nonviolent activist. And the John Lewis example allows Fisk University, it allows me, it allows the Brennan Center to step into some spaces and doors, to build those alliances across various sectors. And what it also demonstrates, at least for me, is he also had a patience to absorb and be a sponge of complaints and criticisms in a way that few lawmakers, I'm talking about from activists and organizers, that few lawmakers did not have. But I'll also say just a couple things. The posthumous letter that he wrote that was released after his death,
during the Black Lives Matter
movement that was released, offers a roadmap, I think, for how we have to continue to fight for justice, particularly for the next generation and future generations. But finally, what I'll say is, and I think this goes back to the question of the South, we can make inroads in the South. I'm an idealist. I'm confident. It may take some time. We can make inroads. We can make progress if we have the belief. But also, if we being the activists, organizers, the people of goodwill, if we find ways to also overcome our own fragmentation, our own internal polarization, which Kareem knows all too well about, given his experience working in the South, we can make a difference. And what John Lewis offers is a roadmap for how people of goodwill who are aligned with our values could overcome our own internal fragmentation in order to move forward and create a roadmap for social and political change.
Each of us in our own wonky way will be making good trouble together. We're really honored and thrilled to be doing it with you and your colleagues. We're very excited about what this means for our work on democracy and justice, and look forward to so much more. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
This is an exciting new area of work. If you enjoyed this conversation and all the other conversations on The Briefing, please follow us on social media platforms where The Briefing can be heard. Share it with your friends. That's the best way to get the word out about these conversations about American democracy, its challenges, and what we can all do to make its future better. Thanks for being with us.